The engine is starting up.
Hi there. Welcome to the Email Marketing Summit 2025. Today's discussion is going to be about creating visual hierarchy for ultimate email readability. And I hope you enjoy today's session. Now, the reason you're here today is because I believe, and many believe, that anyone can send good emails. But there's a problem with this because good is no longer good enough. Today, we're going to learn how to change that. And my name is Dez. I hail all the way from the southern tip of Africa, a tiny town called Struisbaai in South Africa. And I'm going to be discussing how you can use visual hierarchy and email layout quite effectively to be able to take your emails from good to phenomenal. Now, the purpose of today's chat is to run through a couple of things, but I first want to chat about who I represent. And there are two entities that I officially represent. The first of those being Prevo Digital. That is the QR code that you see on your screen. Now, I head up the commercial elements at Prevo Digital, who is one of Africa's leading performance-based agencies. So we help our customers take their ads, their SEO efforts, and what they're doing in the online sales space and turn that into a profitable business exercise. That's kind of what I spend my daylight hours doing. Now, at night, on the other hand, I run email advice in your inbox. I wish it was cool enough to say that I'm Batman in the evenings, but unfortunately, that number is taken. So, what I do in the evenings is help folks win at email. And one of the big reasons that I'm joining everyone here today. Now, email advice in your inbox and Email Expert Africa is a institution and organization that's been designed as a community for email senders to learn how to send the best emails possible. Now, there are emails of various kinds being sent across the globe every minute, every second. And I guess that's why you're at this conference, after all, is to learn a little bit more about email and where it's going. But the Email Advice in Your Inbox newsletter is a community of thousands of email senders that are learning how to send good emails. And these two QR codes on the screen will take you through to have a look at what I do at Prevo Digital and give you a little glimpse of what I'm doing with Email Advice in Your Inbox. And these will come up later, but if you do get an opportunity, I'd love for you to check those out. Now, what we're going to be running through in this presentation is a little bit more about capturing attention. Now, in the time that this has popped up on your screen, and it will see you start again, something that you may not realize, something that is crucial to your email success, is making sure that you capture attention and you capture attention quickly. Now, you'll see that countdown timer on your screen. It keeps ringing back 10 seconds. I want to give you a harsh email reality. Not a lot of time is being spent reading your emails. 10 seconds or less is what they say is the average that people spend on the emails that they're reading in their inbox. Not a lot of time, no. People are skimming. People don't have time. There are a plethora of emails in people's inboxes. So how do you go about capturing attention? Now, what we're going to look at is how to use your first 10 to 50 words and make that matter. The idea today is to run through how to grab attention and make sure that you keep that attention. And 10 seconds is not a long time to do this. So how do you go about doing that as an email sender? And that's what we're going to look at. Now, I'd like you to take a look at two emails from two large brands. The first of those emails is this email from Macy's. Now, The second email we're going to assess today is this email by Nike. And I'd like you to think carefully, think about your inbox, think about email in general. And the idea here is not to throw any shade at anyone for bad email practice. But I'd like you to take a look at these, and I'd like you to answer to yourself, which one looks easier on the eye? Which one captures and centers attention? Which one looks better in your inbox, especially if you're reading this on a mobile device? Now, I know it's a relatively obvious answer, and I, again, do not want to throw any shade at the Macy's email here, because preference always comes into play. But if you're looking at the ability to quickly consume information and take an action, there's a clear winner here. And that winner comes down to the concept and the premise behind today's conversation, and that is the concept of visual hierarchy. What is visual hierarchy? Let's chat a little bit more about that. Now, visual hierarchy means a couple of things. The first of those is essentially the size and the scale of the elements and how they're arranged in your email in accordance with their importance. Right? So, should you look at size and scale and you think about it carefully, larger elements generally tend to grab more attention. Right? So what happens is in emails and in good writing and in the way that web content is constructed, you generally have a large header or body of text. It then gets smaller, and then you've got your call to action. And we're going to discuss these principles a little bit more today. But the first concept or premise behind visual hierarchy is using size and scale well. Now, what we're going to look at here next is color and contrast. Okay, so color and contrast are the ability for someone reading your emails or your digital content to be able to distinguish between the colors on the page, to be able to distinguish how well those colors stand off the background, and how those images adjust to background colors. And we're going to dive into that a little bit further. But the idea here is to focus on your color and contrast. Now, the third of those is your typography, and there are a couple of pros in the email world that do this really well. But things like your font choice, the weighting of those fonts, the styles, and the way that those are structured within your emails help distinguish which content types are important to your reader, and it also shows them which content belongs in which order. That typography definitely helps structure that. Now, the final element within the visual hierarchy 101 is the way that your spacing works. And this is something that some emails get really, but they do it really well. But there are also a ton of email senders who get this wrong. Everything is cramped, everything is close together. And the problem with this is it has a knock-on effect, and not just in grabbing attention, but also in the actions people take within your email. So if you use your spacing well, you use strategically placed white spacing, you look at the way that your elements are distanced from one another in your emails, what you're doing is not only improving the experience within your email, but you're creating a better opportunity for your audience to read through your content more easily. So if you had to take all of these and put them together, the idea here is that visual hierarchy refers to how the design elements within your emails are structured in accordance with their importance. So the idea here is to take the most important information, place that first, and then from there, subvert that to the next most important information until you've got that person reading that email taking an action. Okay, so the idea, guide your audience's attention, make sure that they quickly grasp your message. And remember, within 10 seconds, it's really tough to do that. There are a couple of tips and tricks and ways that you can go about doing this, but the idea there is to use those 10 seconds well so that you've structured it very carefully for good consumption of your email. Now, I'd like you to consider the next slide, and I'd like you to take a look at this image. Right? You may have seen it before in some way, shape, or form on the internet, but I'd like you to take this image, I'd like you to let it percolate. Take a second, read through each of these. And I want you to answer to yourself, did you read it in the order that this image was designed? Did you read the main section first? Did you read the subheading next? You've then got your content below that, and you've got your tiny content at the top. 9 times out of 10, most readers will follow these cues. This is the premise, and this is the concept of visual hierarchy, is creating that order and structure within your emails so that someone takes the right order in terms of their reading. Now, if you look at this alone, you'll see that things like sizing that we've just spoken about, spacing, contrast, typography, these all work together to create the structure in which the readers of your emails are consuming this content. But what about the principle of directional cues? Well, here's another element you may not have considered in your visual hierarchy. These cues are essentially the visual elements that guide the eye to the content in a way that you want it to be guided. And many times we think of using things like arrows. If you want someone to click on a carousel, you've generally got an arrow to the left or to the right. If you want someone to look at something important, you've got a line pointing to it, you've got an emoji pointing at it. What we're going to do is look at the structure and design and layout of your emails to be able to optimize for directional cues. What I'd like us to do is revisit the 2 emails that we took a look at earlier. The first of those, the Macy's email. And the second of those, the Nike email. And I'd like you to take a look at the Macy's one first. Right, so let's take a step back. Let's leave the Nike one off the screen. And I'd like you to carefully analyze this email. Right? There's a lot going on here. But is there visual hierarchy? Now, objectively, they've got things like the bold and large typography. If you look at the discount within this email, that's the main element. That's the main hook here, right? So they're trying to use the hook to be able to get people to read more. But it doesn't end there. There are confusing discounts all over the place. If you think about it, there's lack of focus, right? So the first thing here is, as much as there is some bold typography and it draws your eye to something specific, your eye doesn't know where to go next. Should it look at a button? Should it look at the next section? Should it just skim and go, okay, Macy's is giving a discount or giving a specific sale? There's a lot. The next element here, and this is where the lack of focus comes in, is they've got, and if you look at this email, probably 20 to 25 calls to action. And this is just above the fold. This is before someone has even scrolled through that first part of the email. So what this is causing in your audience, if you think about it, is not action, but what we call analysis paralysis. So what's happening here is you're inundating your audience with a plethora of choices and hoping that they pick one, when in fact they're going, I've made way too many choices here. I don't want to take an action, so I'll come back to it later, or I won't come back to it at all. Now remember, the idea in an email is to get someone to take an action as quickly as possible, because if there's no action, either you're just being nice or just sharing information. But the idea there is to take that action so that, one, you can enhance the experience within your emails. You know what people are clicking on. Two, you're creating engagement, right? You want someone to take that action to either tell you more, to take the intended action that you've put together for that email. And you also want to ensure that you're making money from your emails. I mean, that's the reason that most of us send emails, is to make sure that we make money from them, right? So how do you go about doing this if you confuse your audience? And this is where visual hierarchy takes place. You need to be able to direct that action in the first place. Now, another issue I see here, and again, I don't want to rip this email apart. It's not visually, it's not too bad, but again, it doesn't follow good, sound visual hierarchical principles. But if you look at this here, there is a big lack of segmentation, and we're not going to touch on segmentation too much today. That's not the intention of this discussion. But the idea here is, when I send an email, I've spoken about this in the past. There's this concept called the rule of one. Now, the rule of one is designed for email senders to think carefully about what they're sending. Right? Am I sending an email as if it's a single email to a single individual, with a single message and a single call to action. What do I want them to do with that? That's the rule of one. You've got one email designed as if it's been designed for one person to consume one specific message and take one individual action. Now, if you look at the Macy's email, there are a heap of different things for different people, right? If you look purely at the calls to action in the main image alone, I mean, you've got women's items, men's items, shoes, plus sizes, bed and bath. There may be something for everyone, but should there be? And that's a question you need to ask yourselves when you're sending emails, right? You're going to confuse your reader if you don't get that right. So one of those basics, and it's spoken about often, start with that segmentation in mind. This is not something Macy seems to have done here. Now, another, and it's a small one, but from a bad user experience perspective, you'll notice that and you'll see it in there, the looks discount code has been used over and over again. I'm sure we've got some smart tech nowadays that can individualize discount codes. I know many email platforms do this in the way that they operate. But the idea here is to customize that for each of the individuals reading that email so that that user experience is enhanced. Add it at checkout, include it automatically in your UTM tagging. There are a whole bunch of ways that you can do this, hoping that someone's going to copy and paste it or not get their discount if they don't is a little bit archaic. You want to think about that. It's not ideal. Now, what I'd like you to look at next is the Nike email. Right, so I'm somewhat biased because I'm a fan of the Nike emails, and the recent ones, this actually had an animated GIF that I haven't included in here, but alas, I would like to illustrate the principle. But if you do get a chance, my good friend Andy, who's also speaking at the Email Marketing Summit 2025, who runs Email Love, is where I often keep an eye out for all of these. So go check out Andy's talk if you haven't already, and check out Email Love. There's a treasure trove of good emails there. Nike is one of those that's added to my collection. And if you look at this email, and again, I'm saying this from my point of view, it's going to differ across the globe, but Nike has come up with a clean and crisp and well contrasted email. That's the idea here. It made it easy to understand, and there's good visual hierarchy, right? If you look at this email itself, the main header stands out well. The upcoming drops title fits perfectly. It's the largest portion of text. And what's happening here is just below that, you've got the image of the product, and then you've got the sub information where the line starts here. You've got the information where you can go on and grab the drops side of things with a clear call to action. Right, so there's one intention behind this email: get someone to see the visual appeal, see what it's about, and take that action or find out more. So everything is legible. There's a good split, if you look at it, between images and text, which balances things out well should images not load. If you think of email platforms like Outlook, very often you need to ensure that you download images every time you receive an email. So the idea here is that everything is well balanced. The brand is subtle but recognizable. If you look at the small Michael Jordan logo, that's the whole point of these Air Jordans. And they've also done something pretty clever, and we're going to chat about this, but it's a common principle in email, and it works really well from a visual hierarchy perspective. But they've taken a specific type of layout that's designed to draw your eye in a specific direction and use that well to enable action within their emails. What I'd like to chat about and what I'd like to cue here is what we call the inverted triangle design. Now let's chat a little bit about what this is designed to do. Right? And before I jump into it, the inverted triangle essentially takes the information that you've got on the page and it lays it out using the most important information at the top of that email with less important information down. And what it's trying to do is leading with that larger information into smaller information and essentially an action at the bottom of that. It's creating and I'm terrible with my fingers here, but it's creating a sort of inverted triangle on the way down. So the idea here is to point that information down, point towards that call to action, and to get someone taking an action from that specific layout or design. So it places, as I've mentioned, the most important information at the top, and further down, it moves that information in a suborder, leading the eye to ensure that people take that specific action. So this is the premise of visual hierarchy, right? Important information to least important information. And the way that this works in the inverted triangle design, if you look at it, is it grabs attention first, it builds the anticipation in the middle, and then you've got your button, you've got your call to action. And as you can see in the Nike email, let's take a look at that one again. Here's our Nike email. Have a look at the triangle within this design. The idea here is to start with that important information. What they're doing is they're subtly, even if it's just using a shoe, getting you to take that action because the shoe is even pointed in that direction. So it's got a clear intro text and context. It's got a clear direction for the eye to follow. It's got clear subcontext and supporting information. And again, our rule of one working here, get someone to take that action quickly within your email campaigns. You've got 10 seconds. How am I going to get them to take that act in 10 seconds? Okay, so let's look at one or two more examples of how this works. The first of those is an email by Rootless again, and I've put these arrows there. You can see why this is a commonly chosen email layout or design function, right? Clear header information, product sub information, and action thereafter. And here's another one by Postable. Again, the idea here, and you can see the call to action is even higher up, but the idea follows the same premise. They want you to look in a specific direction, and they've used that triangular design or layout to be able to achieve this. Now, what you may not have thought of or considered is that you can also optimize your emails for the way that people read. And so here are two more layouts that are commonly used to be able to, and essentially, if you think about it, lay the email and structure out in accordance with the way that people's eyes move on a page. And let's chat about the first one, the Z pattern layout. This is a commonly used one where you've got a bunch of information, right, that follows the way people read across a page. Now, in most of the Western world, we read from left to right. So what tends to happen is we follow information across a page, we then start on the next line and then move across that page. Now watch what's happening with my hand. I'm starting, I'm moving down, and then starting again. You see the Z. I don't know if Zorro is still a thing, but the idea remains, right? We're drawing that Z with people's eyes across the page. Now, this could be an effective mechanism to guide your readers through the way that these emails are structured based on the way that they read, right? And I've mentioned it here. What we do is we tend to jump ahead as well when we read content. So we'll read a little bit, skim, read, skim, but our heads are moving in that direction. So the idea, and here's an example of this, is to be able to guide, even if it's an inverted C, it moves in the same premise, guide the eye to different parts of that email campaign. Okay, so this is a common one. You've got your dual column layout. This is generally how it's structured. Very often those columns become inverted. So you'll see in this one, you've got your call to action on the right. You've then got it to your left, then got it to the right. These are generally used in emails where you've got more than one action that you want someone to take. Look, in this email, it's a great example of that rule of one. They want them to take a single action, and that's to get started. But should you have multiple articles with calls to action, we do this in the email advice in your inbox newsletter as an example. If you've got multiple calls to action and multiple elements that you want the eye to follow, this is where you go about moving that eye across the page. Now, in this layout and structure as well, you can also see the progression from left to right, right? So each of those naturally draws the eye in the direction that you want someone to follow. And it doesn't mean that the entire email needs to just be a big Z shape. It could be a section of that too. But the effect remains. And here's another example by Samsung as a brand, done a little bit differently, more on the consuming of information side, leading to a single call to action at the bottom. But you get the idea, right? It keeps it visually interesting. It's not just the left to right that we're looking at the entire time. The idea here is to be able to follow that sweep of the eye down to the next section, down to the next section, and get someone to take an action from there. Okay, so that's one way that you can go about approaching this. The second way is something that we refer to as the F pattern layout. Now, the F pattern layout is, if you think about it, a variation of your Z pattern layout. And the idea here is to ensure that the most important information, like with the inverted triangle, is listed at the top, and sub information or less important information is listed on the left and right sides of that email, and the call to action is placed at the bottom of that. But what it's doing is it's sweeping down. So remember, our eyes follow that content, move down, follow it to a shorter spot in that page, follow a little bit of a shorter spot, and you take an action. This is what that looks like, right? So you can see here you've got your welcome, you've got a little bit of sub information, and right there you've got your call to action on the left. So again, following the premise of the Western world in reading from left to right, you're placing that call to action where someone's looking, not necessarily at the end of a section which they may not have read. That is the idea here. So when we look at the F pattern layout, what we're essentially doing is arranging parts of your content within your emails in the shape of an F. Yes, it's got multiple branches to that F, but the idea is you're prioritizing that content according to how important each of those elements is. Now, if you think about this, you can place the most important parts, or hotspots as we call them, on the pattern in relation to how you'd like to increase interaction. And what this does is it allows your content to be understood and internalized in a quick and easy way. Remember, less than 10 seconds, that's what we've got. So if we had to showcase another example, and I just put this one briefly together, remember your eye moves from point 1 to point 2. It then moves down to point 3, and then to point 4, which is at a shorter point, and then 5 to 6. And just below point 7 is where you're going to put your call to action. That is your F pattern layout. Now, with each of these layouts, you have to keep things in mind. And what you don't want to do is turn the F pattern into you know what, right? These patterns do not work on every device. And this is something you need to carefully consider, because at the end of the day, what most people are reading their emails on are these things. Now, mobile phone usage is one of those, and getting your email design right on mobile phones is one of those things that separates a good email sender from a phenomenal email sender, right? And if you think about using your Z-shaped pattern, what's going to happen is that content that was once next to one another in either order is now going to stack one on top of the other. So you need to consider this. What happens in the process where it's an F-shaped design? Yes, you'll still experience stacking, but it's not going to adhere to that structure when we look at a mobile phone. So what happens when it comes to mobile phones, and we're going to chat about it shortly, but what happens when it comes to mobile phones is you need to keep visuals in mind, because those visuals, especially in your layout and design, are what lay the foundation for mobile email success. And let's chat a little bit more about the mobile side of things, right? So there are a couple of rules when it comes to mobile, and the first of those is, can you read it? Right? Remember, a screen moves from this size to this size. What happens to the information that I can consume in a big screen is all of a sudden compressed or hyper compressed to a really small device, if you think about it. Can you read it? Now, when it comes to mobile phones, your premise behind your email design and visual hierarchy needs to be to ensure that everything can be easily read. Right? So remember, everything is compressed. What's happening is everything is reduced to a smaller size. And if your audience cannot read it quickly, or they cannot consume that information, you're going to lose their attention. So the first thing you want to check on mobile, regardless of the design, regardless of the layout you choose, can you read what's in those specific emails? Now, the next point over here is, can you click it? I remember you probably don't have thumbs like this massive monstrosity here, and it takes up literally half a screen. But if you think about your average user experience, and if you think about a mobile screen, you've got a big thumb trying to take a really small action. And if that doesn't work well or work intuitively, you're going to have people clicking here and clicking there and all over the place. And they're not going to click on the thing that you actually want them to click on. Now, when it comes to getting people to click, white space and clear buttons are critical. I cannot emphasize this. If you put links too close together, you can have accidental clicks. If you don't use enough white space, you're going to have people scrolling past links or hyperlinks. You're going to create a tarnished experience in your emails because screens are, at the end of the day, really small and our thumbs really big. So the idea here, don't add too many links or separate them well. Make sure that they're well spaced. Make sure that they're clearly defined. That is part of that. Can you read it? But if a link looks like it's just part of the general content, it's not going to get clicked. Buttons are your friend on mobile. Don't forget that. Now, the third part, can you see it? Now, there's a difference between being able to read something and actually seeing something. And this is where your images come into play. All right. Now, with regards to images, your email layout and your structure and everything that happens within that design generally defaults to the mode in which you're reading your emails. Now, we've all heard of that term dark mode, and we're going to chat about that shortly. But the idea remains, if your images don't render well, especially on mobile, you need to consider this because it's going to be half the experience that your audience is going to receive. Before we chat about dark mode, I just want to leave you with a stat, but most research in 2025 from 2024 states that around 65% plus of all email readers are reading emails on the mobile device as the majority. So that means that 65% of your effort needs to go into making sure that it looks good on mobile, not the other way around. And a big part of mobile, and you'll notice this if you have a Gmail account, you've got an Apple Mail account, is our friend dark mode. What we need to consider is what happens if the lights go out. Now, what happens if phones default to dark mode? And this is a common element, right? Are your emails afraid of the dark? This is where you need to step in and think carefully about the way that you approach dark mode within your email campaigns, because dark mode's gaining popularity. And as I've mentioned, certain inboxes like Apple, like Gmail, they default to the device mode. And if you've got dark mode selected as a theme or as a mode on your device, your emails are going to open up in dark mode. Now, in terms of managing dark mode well, there are a few ways that you can go about getting this right. The first of those is check images with built-in backgrounds. Now, those gorgeous graphics and white backgrounds, remember in dark mode, they're going to sit awkwardly on a gray or black email, right? And if your image is gray or black, consider it a game of Where's Wally, folks. That's exactly it. You're going to lose your attention because you don't have the ability to see those images. The next one, and it's quite a common mistake that even I've made up until recently, is checking for visual consistency. And very often one of those things is rounded versus square image corners. If your image corners are rounded, right, and if you don't apply something like a border radius, you need to ensure that you save the image with a rounded edge, especially if the background is white, because again, if it inverts to black, you're going to have a sharply cut image on a black background when it had a beautiful rounded edge on white, or the rest of your email had rounded edges. Again, visual consistency not just looks good, but it attracts your audience to keep reading your emails in future. The next of these is to ensure that your text color versus your background is solid. Remember, most editors default to black text on white. In dark mode, your email clients, your Gmails, your Outlooks, your Yahoos, your Apple Mails, they'll flip this, but they don't flip those colors or invert those colors consistently. Now, what happens is you get gray on a gray background that you can't read, and that's no good. Okay, so as a quick fix, what you want to do is stick with pure white, which is your hashtag FFFFF, or pure black, which is your hashtag 0000 color codes, and you want to make sure that your text adheres to either of those. Right? Email clients are most predictable when it comes to those. And if you have a custom color, I know I use a blue color specifically as my accent color. What you want to make sure of is that it's legible in dark mode. If you don't check this, you're going to lose your audience's attention and your text is going to have missing elements. So look after that carefully. The next of these are links and colors in buttons. Remember, bright, custom colored links might look perfect on a white background, but they could disappear on a black background. The same goes for your buttons. Always check how they look in both modes. And the simple element of adding an outline or even a simple drop shadow, depending on the way that you're designing your emails, can help make all the difference. So keep that in mind. Another point you want to look out for is make sure of image inversion. And I spoke about this earlier, and we'll chat about it more shortly. But email apps try to help by inverting the colors of things in your emails, even your images. They can distort your carefully chosen design, and things like gradients or photography, you might as well throw those out the window when they distort because they don't follow the same visual structure that you had prior. Things like, oh, and I've gone back there, things like your social icons and emojis. Remember black Facebook logos on a black background? Those are gone. Things like certain emojis, if you think of the sun icon, it turns black on a dark mode. Weird glitch in the matrix there somehow. But again, look at those things and look at your logo. All right, so white logos on a transparent background disappear against white or light mode, and they vanish into a proverbial black hole. So make sure you keep a version of your background or your logo with a solid background and make sure that that's always visible. Right, so as I mentioned here, make sure that you test transparent PNG backgrounds. Remember, if something is designed with a background color behind the image, it won't invert. But if it's a dark color with a transparent background, you could wind up with an issue. And here's a great example of one of those, right? So you can see here, this image that looked good on a certain device when inverted just as a purely transparent background PNG has gone from looking the wrong way to looking the right way. But it doesn't just stop at visuals. What you want to look at in your email campaigns is readability. Remember, this is how, if you think about it, emails can be read. And there's a couple of elements to this, and I'd like to get through these quickly because I am cognizant of time. But there are a couple of elements that you want to keep in mind, especially when it comes to making sure that your emails have a good text structure and that you don't miss the mark on these. Okay, so the first of those, clear use of headings, right? Make sure that your headings aren't essentially disappearing or confusing. And you want to make sure that your reader knows what's important and what information follows that specific heading. The next of those is use the right font size. Remember, anything smaller than 14 pixels can be very difficult to read. The third of those is your visual hierarchy. And yes, we've spoken about this, but if your email lacks that structure, you're going to make it more difficult for your audience to read. So keep that in mind when it comes to readability. And the last of those is use good formatting. So make sure that you use things like bullet points, use section breaks, use numbering. There's a whole bunch of elements. Your text formatting uses that as a structure to make sure that you've got a solid way to read those. It's also more eye-catching, right? You don't just see this plain wall of text. It's got some order. It's got some structure. Now, what I'd like you to think about is if you can't read an email, AI likely can't either. Now, what would a talk be in 2025 without mention of AI? But there's one thing that you may not have considered in your email structure, and that is your AI email summaries. Right, so that little bit of section that you can see in that Gmail account over there, where Google or other AI readers is taking the content of those emails and creating a brief summary for the reader. That's what I'm talking about. Now, things like preview text automation, condensing tools, all of these work the same. And these can be problematic if you don't have a good structure or your emails are badly formatted. Okay, now these summaries rely on a little bit of key information, and this you've got to keep in mind. The first of those is your headings, right? So are your headings sound? The next of those is your link structure. Is there a good structure to your links, or is it confusing for the AI reader to be able to interpret that data? And do you have good text hierarchy? Are you telling an AI reader what is the header, what is a subheader, what is a paragraph of content? If it confuses that, it's not going to spit out the correct summary or even summarize that information. Think about it. If everything looks the same, what is the most important element for it to pull out there? Now, if you've set up a strong hierarchy, if you've got clear headlines, concise body, a good call to action, the summary echoes the intent of what you're trying to achieve. And you need to keep this in mind because, again, these are going to become the norm, not the exception in the inbox, and you want to be geared up for that as you go. Now, there's one more non-negotiable, right? If you're aiming to achieve what we call GOAT status, greatest of all time status in email, and that is this word accessibility. Now, I could have multiple talks on this topic alone, but a talk about visual hierarchy and readability wouldn't be complete without accessibility being in the picture. Now, accessibility is not just about the impact that you're leaving with your audience, it's also about including absolutely everyone within that email world. And I'd like you to consider this because there are a ton more people than you may realize that have visual impairments, that require screen readers, that just simply struggle. As soon as you reach a certain age, the eyes start going, you start struggling to read things. You want to make it easier for your audience to consume that content. Now, your emails, and I say this strongly, don't mean much if not everyone can access them. And I'd like you to look at a couple of things that are really critical when it comes to your email campaigns and why accessibility is critical. And the first of those is inclusivity. Remember, people with visual impairments or cognitive impairments, you give them the opportunity to access and engage with your content, and everyone deserves equal access. The next of those is legal compliance. Now, in different jurisdictions, there are different mandates and different laws that govern the use of accessibility in the digital space. Doing this well in your emails, make sure that you stay compliant with those regulations, and those are changing all the time. So following good principles all the time means that you can have a good structure. It means that you can reach more people. Remember, if more people can see or read your content, you have the ability to reach a broader audience. You improve user experiences. Remember, it doesn't just benefit readers, it also makes emails easier to navigate. So you want to keep that in mind. And then there are a couple of things that you can do to do this well that we'll have discussed or not for you to take advantage of. The first of those is descriptive alt text. Remember, all your images need to have an alternative text. If a screen reader is reading that content, what is it going to tell the person listening what that image is? You need to ensure that you use good alt text. The next of those is proper headings. Remember your semantic structure within these. They create a logical flow, and I keep coming back to this, but it's more important than you realize. The third of those is to make sure that your clickable elements are distinct, right? So that means they're keyboard accessible and they don't rely on a specific color. You've got to be cognizant of that as well. Things like avoiding text embedded in images. A screen reader can't read what click now says on that image. You want to make sure that you use strong color contrast, and we've discussed why this is important. You want to keep copy clear and concise, again, for obvious reasons that we've just gone through. And you want to test with screen readers. This is something that a lot of email senders neglect, but it's something that can really make a massive difference. Test on screen readers. And last but not least, use responsive design. So again, we've spoken about mobile. We've spoken about ensuring that your emails adapt to mobile. This helps your accessibility as well. Now, the goal at the end of the day, and we're nearly at the end, so I appreciate you bearing with me, is to ensure that we create emails that break down barriers and ensure our messages reach every corner of the globe. And where do we go from here? Right. The next point over here is to ensure that we follow these three things that we've spoken about today. The first of those is create visual hierarchy. Tell your reader what's important, what to focus on, and guide them to take that next action. You want to build your emails for easy readability, so make sure that they're easy to scan or click, and make sure that you don't lose your readers before you get the chance to keep them. And the third of those, and we've just spoken about this, don't neglect accessibility. Your emails need to be read or heard by everyone that's part of your audience. You don't want to limit your reach or neglect neglect the needs of your readers. Tongue twister at the end there. So there's one more thing I've got for you today, and that is that you need an audience to be able to speak to be able to build better emails for. And I've put together something that I've spent approximately 200 hours on, and it's a free guide to being able to grow your email database. And this is something that we give to all new members of the Email Advice in Your Inbox newsletter community. So grab your phone while you've got it there, check out the QR code on the screen, and I'll make sure that in your welcome email, you don't just receive this, but a resource that I've been putting together that covers 200 of the best email senders. That's also included in that welcome sequence, and a ton of future value every 2 weeks in your inbox. Now, I'd like to say you've got this, and today's the start of a great email sending journey. I appreciate your time, and I hope that you keep sending good emails, friends. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I do appreciate you being here with me.